So, this isn't a video that Cindy and I were planning to make. But after making a post on Wayalife.com and seeing the kind of response we were getting on it, we thought that maybe a few of you here would be interested in seeing what we did as well. I am, of course, talking about our Jeep JT Gladiator and a small mod that we made to it. But before we get to that, allow me to circle back just a bit. In spite of what some seem to think, we don't make videos of every wheeling trip that we go on. In fact, unless it's a special event or something specific, we rarely film any of our trips. Why, you might ask? Well, because it's a lot of work, especially if you do it in a way that we'd feel is necessary in order to tell a good story. Sure, we still grab clips of this and that, but more for our own personal memories than anything. Like most of you, all we really want to do is get out on the trail and have some fun with our friends. And while we don't have video proof of every single run that we've been on, I can assure you that we do still wheel on a regular basis and in most of our rigs, including our Jeep Gladiator. In fact, we take this thing on all the same trails that we take any of our built-up Jeeps on, and at times at the cost of a few bumps and bruises.
Oh no.
Now, aside from the damage that we did playing on the super tight and slick trails that they have up in Maine, there are two spots that we have been tapping typically when coming off of big rocks and obstacles. Of course, this was on the body trim, right behind the rear tires and just before our rear bumper. For the most part, this damage was just superficial, but it'd been happening enough times to really bug us, and it got us thinking that it could be a bigger problem someday. So, a couple months ago, I had this idea to modify and reinstall the factory Rubicon corner guards. And while it seemed like a pretty good idea at the time, I was never able to really get them installed as well as I could or should, being that we no longer had the factory bumper or the hitch receiver to secure them to. Unfortunately, on our last trip across the Rubicon, we found that these guards would ultimately end up doing more harm than good. Specifically, we found that the bolts loosened up after multiple hits, and eventually, the guards themselves ended up slamming to the very body trim that they were supposed to be protecting. As always, Cindy and I made sure to get the body fixed and as quickly as possible. And before we did any more wheeling, we decided that something needed to be done to help prevent damage like this. Obviously, these were not going to be the answer. And after giving things a closer look, we thought maybe all we needed to do was to take a little off the tail end, to give it a little trim, and effectively raise the lowest point of the body by about 4 inches so that the bumper and the frame rails sit below it. Essentially, to help make sure that these guys take on all the hits instead of the body. Fortunately, all we had to do was cut along the body line that was already here. And as you can see, I also did remove the plastic trim on the fenders to help everything flow and look deliberate. I did also make sure to paint the inner fender wells black, and I think the final results of everything look pretty darn factory. As I mentioned before, the body trim used to hang down about 4 inches lower than what you see right here, which means that would have sat right here at 31 inches from the ground. Because of our trim, we're now sitting at 35 inches. Now, what's really interesting is that if you see here, the body trim is now sitting at about 1.5 inches higher than the frame rail. Before, it used to hang down about 2.5 inches below the frame rail, and that's the reason it was getting hit. Now, I should note that the trim is not a pinch seam, so nothing structural was compromised. If anything, I kind of think it exists just to hide things like this ugly muffler. Something I think I'll need to address. Yeah, do you want to play with a new toy? We got you a new toy. Yeah. What should we call this? Piggy?
Piggy.
I think it's Piggy.